Hello, and welcome to another session of the Texas Academy of English, presented by yours truly, Mr. Mendoza. We'll be looking at Level 4, Chapter 3, Passive Voice. In this section, we are going to be taking a closer look at the passive voice and how it is used, giving you a stronger advantage when using it. So we will look at what is the passive voice, what are the rules for the passive voice, what is the structure of the passive voice tenses, and we'll share some sample sentences. So what is the passive voice? The passive voice is a grammatical voice of verb where what would be the object of a corresponding active sentence becomes the subject of the sentence in the passive voice. The passive voice is formed with the appropriate tense of the verb to be plus the past participle. When we write in the passive voice, the subject no longer does an action, but rather becomes acted upon. For instance, in the active voice, we can say John threw the ball. In the passive voice, we would say the ball was thrown by John. What are the rules for the passive voice? Well, I will share four rules for the passive voice. The passive voice is used when the agent or the person who does the action is unknown, unimportant, or obvious from the context. It is also used to make a more polite or formal statement, or when the action is more important than the agent, as in the processes, instructions, events, reports, headlines, news items, and advertisements. Or finally, to put emphasis on the agent. Now let's look at some examples. So the thing that you should note about the passive voice and the structure is that the passive and the active voice tenses in English, we use the base form of the verb, or we call it V1. V2 is the past simple, and V3 is the past participle. So that's what we'll be using to name the verb tenses in the passive and active. So now let's look at the structure. So in the present simple, we have the subject and the base form of the verb. Sample sentence would be, I do my homework. Now in the passive voice, we have the subject plus the verb to be, like is, am, are, and the past participle. So an example would be, my homework is done. In the present continuous, we have, I am doing my homework. Notice the subject, I, we're using the verb am plus the continuous tense, doing my homework. And then the passive voice, my homework is being done. Notice again the structure. In the present perfect tense, we have the subject plus the verb have or has and the past participle. So I can say, I have done my homework. In the passive voice, we have the same structure, subject, the verb has or have, plus been, plus the past participle. So I can say, my homework has been done. Now continuing with the structure, when we look at the past simple, we use the subject plus the past simple verb, I did my homework. And in the passive voice, we use the subject plus was or were plus the past simple. So we can say, my homework was done. In the past continuous, subject plus was, were, plus the verb ending in ing. I was doing my homework. In the passive voice, we say my homework was being done. In the past perfect, we use the subject plus the verb had plus the past simple. I had done my homework. And in the passive voice, we say my homework had been done. Notice the structure, subject plus had been plus the past simple. Okay, continuing on. So in the future tense, we use the subject plus will or shall plus this base form of the verb. I will do my homework. That's the active voice. In the passive voice, subject plus will be plus the past participle. So my homework will be done. In the future, using the verb to be or be going to, subject plus is, am, are, plus going plus to plus be plus a verb ending in ing. So I'm going to do my homework. My homework is going to be done. Okay, continuing with the structure. Now using a modal, the structure is the subject plus the modal verb plus the base form of the verb. I must do my homework in the active voice. In the passive voice, subject, modal verb plus the verb be plus the past participle. My homework must be done. Modal perfect, the structure is the subject plus the modal verb plus the verb have plus the past participle. I should have done my homework. In the passive voice, subject, modal verb plus have been plus the past participle. My homework should have been done. So now let's take a look at some more sample sentences. In the present simple, I make breakfast. What do you think that is? Is that active or passive? It is active. So breakfast is made by me is the passive. In the present continuous form of the tense, we can say they are painting the house. That again is the active voice. The passive voice in the same sentence reads, the house is being painted, and that would be the passive voice. In the present perfect, we can say, someone has eaten my porridge. That is the active voice. In the passive voice, my porridge has been eaten. In the present perfect continuous, we can say, Louis has not been practicing the piano. That's the active voice. Or the piano has not been being practiced by Louis. The passive voice. In future tense with will, passive voice, my mom will take us to the zoo. Pardon me, that was the active voice. I said passive. And the passive voice, we will be taken to the zoo by mom. That's the passive voice. Staying with the future, with be going to, I am going to watch the play. The active voice. The passive voice is the play is going to be watched by me. In the past simple, we can say, I visited my grandparents last week. That's the active voice. The passive voice, my grandparents were visited by me last week. The past continuous, Allison was baking a birthday cake. That's the active voice. And the passive voice, the birthday cake was being baked by Allison. And the past perfect tense, we can say, he had cleaned the house before his wife came. That's the active voice. And the passive, the house had been cleaned by him before his wife came. In the past perfect continuous, we can say, in the active voice, I had been cleaning the yard for 2 hours. The passive, the yard had been being cleaned for 2 hours. That's the passive voice. The modal present, you can solve the problem. That's the active voice. And the problem can be solved, the passive voice. The modal present perfect, the crash might have killed him. That's the active voice. And in the passive, he might have been killed by the crash. So the last thing I'm going to a rather lengthy chart of the tenses, the structure, and sentence samples. So I hope this was an informative short video of the passive voice versus the active voice. Please join us at Texas Academy of English. It's been my pleasure. Yours truly, Mr. Mendoza. Until next time.